Hey moms, it's Laura Ollinger. Welcome to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast. Because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world. So welcome. Today we have a party in the house. So we have multiple guests and I'm so excited to introduce them. And so let's get started. Could we start with Dr. Avery and kind of go counterclockwise there?
Sure. So my name is Avery Honig. I'm in private practice in Dallas. I'm a psychologist and I work with mostly teens, some adults and some college students as well.
Awesome.
I am Dr. Lucy Smith. I am a psychologist also here in Dallas. I specialize in eating disorders. So work with, teens and adults.
And I'm Dr. Jamie Wilson. I'm a psychologist also, and in private practice, sharing office space with Lucy and Avery. And I work with older teens and adults throughout the lifespan, specializing in trauma, anxiety, and relationship issues.
Perfect.
And together we do a podcast called Inspiration from the Couch, where we really talk about kind of a whole variety of things. We developed it kind of to try to package up the things that we tell a lot of our clients in one kind of, easily available space. And so we've been doing that podcast since April of 21. Mm-hmm. And we also developed a new business more recently called the Badass Rebellion. We're really focused on midlife women and trying to offer support and education, and then just kind of talking a little bit about kind of what's happening emotionally and psychologically during that time frame.
That's amazing. And how did you all meet each other?
We met in a consultation group. How long was that ago? I think it was
like 12 years ago, 10 years ago, a while ago.
Yeah.
Which was a lifesaver, right? So when you're
Yes.
in private practice, like each of us was kind of on our own, and it's a very lonely in some ways way because you're like working in isolation. So we started this weekly consultation group where once a week we get together over lunch for like an hour and a half each week and, have lunch, talk about difficult cases, just kind of connect and get some support.
Okay. Very cool. So I'm so excited to have you all here today. And just as a FYI, Dr. Avery and I go way back to college. We were in the same sorority together. And so that's what brings us all here today. And also that you all are experts on teenagers and moms. And so that is my specialty as well. So I can't wait to have a great conversation. So let's start off with the concept or the idea of launching your kids. So how do you, and I'll let you answer in the way that you would like to, but how do you kind of develop that independence in your kids and let's actually first give the definition of launching just to the wide audience that we have for people who don't know that term, and then we'll expand from there. So how does that sound?
Great. That sounds good. So we've been talking a lot about this because we're actually kind of starting to offer some talks and workshops on just this topic to some of the high schools in our area. Mm-hmm. And when I think about launching, I think about really what are the skills and strategies and independence that I need for my kid to have to be able to function without me. And so obviously that's going to be in kind of like steps. You're going to have a different series of tasks that you want your child to be able to do independently when you launch them to middle school or high school. Mm-hmm. But I kind of what I really think about is launching to college or launching kind of out into the world. And so what do you need your child to be able to do independently? What confidence do you want your child to kind of have around certain tasks that would allow them to do what they need to do to function without your constant support? Mm-hmm. And so I really think the most important thing about launching in my mind is that it's a process. We would never say like, okay, Laura, go from packing your kid's entire lunch with the ice pack in their backpack, and then tomorrow don't do anything. Like we would never say that, like you'd be setting up your kids for failure. But if we were like, okay, if you're aware that's what we want to work on, how do we kind of like back your support off as we teach them the skills that they need to be able to do it? How do we say, okay, let's pack the lunch together and I'll remind you to pack it so that over time, yeah, sure, maybe in a couple of months you could actually not have to pack the lunch at all, but you want to kind of give that runway of, support while they're learning the skill and able to kind of identify what they need to be able to do it so that they can do it ultimately independently.
That's awesome. I like the idea of that gradual transition. Okay, Lucy or Jamie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think launching too, I think it does involve like a lot of skills. And like Avery was saying, there's scaffolding there. I think launching also too, I think it involves a lot of modeling from parents as well, in, helping them become the person that you would love for them to be, that you would love to see them grow into. And I think, obviously that starts with the parent, that we have to model that as well. Whatever we want our kids to, how we want them to function, how we want them to be in the world, we have to show that as well.
Completely. And I see that with my clients as well. So I like to give lots of real detailed, like hands-on and very like tactile experiences. And so, for example, like calling to make a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment. So the idea is that you put the phone on speaker, you do it right in front of them with your teenager sitting right next to you, so they can hear what that conversation sounds like. They can hear what all the questions are. So that way, when they're ready to make their own appointments, they know what to do. Or, checking themselves out at a doctor's appointment. I had a client who was too afraid to take herself, even though she could drive, but she didn't want to go because she's like, well, I don't know how to pay, like with the insurance and And so it's like, the idea is that they watch you do it. That's what modeling is. And then they're able to do that behavior on their own at some point. So Lucy, you look like you were going to jump in there.
Well, I was just going to throw into, I think part of this is teaching them skills, but I think the other really important piece, especially from a psychological standpoint, is helping both teens or kids and parents cope with the emotions that come up around it all. Because I think everyone has feelings about it, right? So for the kids and teens, it might be scary or anxiety provoking or exciting or whatever it may be. And then parents likewise have feelings about their kids growing up and starting to do things more independently and without them. And so I think a big part of launching also is not only the skill development, but how do we all cope with the myriad of feelings that arise in response?
I think that's a great point. And do you find like extreme examples where some parents just aren't ready to let go and they still want to do everything for them, or the opposite, where I see some parents, and so you tell me that, they're ready to kind of start boosting them out the door when they're like 12 years old, and they're like, you can do it on your own. You're fine. It's almost like they're treating them like mini adults. And so do you see that wide range as well? Like, what's it like for you guys?
Absolutely. And I think that is a big question, is how do you know that if your child is ready for the next step? And I think, honestly, kind of what Lucy was saying too, kind of that emotional experience can really be a good indicator as well. I think for me as a mom, I really noticed that I'm usually pretty fine with doing certain things for people in my family, but then sometimes I will feel resentful. So like, for example, if I start to feel a little resentful that like, hey, you can do your laundry. Why am I doing your laundry? Like, you're sitting there on your phone. I'm running around the house doing laundry. I'm feeling resentful. And that feeling is actually a really good communicator to me that like, okay, my kid has the time. They have the skill. Why am I doing this thing that they can do? And then that's a really good indicator to say, actually, I don't need to do that. I can say, I don't need to get huffy and mad about it. I mean, maybe, but I can kind of say, okay, look, it seems like you have time. It seems like I know that you have the skills. I'm going to need for this to become your responsibility. And I think that issue of time, I think that can be really sticky, because sometimes, especially kids that are very scheduled, that have demanding academics or demanding activities, really what can make it difficult for parents is that they feel like the kid doesn't have any time to do it. And a parent, especially a parent that may have a more flexible work schedule, may say, well, I have time to do their laundry. They don't have time to do their laundry, so I have to do this for them. And I think sometimes, absolutely, that's the right call. I think if you're doing that for most, if not all of the life skills, you're not setting up your child for success. So I think it's kind of that idea of like noticing your own experience and kind of what you're aware of, my child could do this. And then also kind of trying to kind of have your eye on the prize. I think it was maybe Lucy or maybe it was Jamie that said, kind of the idea of like, what do you want your child to be able to do without you when they launch, like into college? And what do you need to do now to start kind of easing off? So it's not just like a drop off,
Well, and Laura, what I love about what you said a minute ago too about those like wide-ranging examples is I think that there's like not a perfect way to do this, right? And at least when I had my kids, I've got a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, but there were the parenting books that tried to tell you like every step of what you should do all the time. And I think that we're dealing with humans, and so there's going to be such variability. And so I think not trying to get it right, because I think we'll get stuck there, but more so how do we just stay really present to whatever might be showing up, because it's going to look different, and there's not a right or wrong way to do it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point as well. So Avery, what would you say to those moms who are stepping in and kind of compensating a lot for their child's busy schedule? Like, how do you teach them those skills if, there's no time? Like, how do you respond to that?
So one thing I will often do is to really have an honest communication about, okay, where is your child right now? And what do you think that their life will look like in the next phase? So if we're talking about, I don't know, like an extreme case, if we have a kid that may be in the Olympics, well, their life in 4 or 5 years is going to look very different than a kid that's playing kind of high school sports and going to college, which is going to look very different for somebody that may be staying at home and taking some college classes to focus on their career full time. So I think it's kind of an idea of like, first, like looking where your child is now, and then looking at where you want your child to be, and just kind of having an honest conversation with yourself about, okay, if I have a 16-year-old that I'm doing all of their laundry, all of their appointment making, and all of their cleaning, and that child already has, a full ride to a college that's across the country, where I'm not planning to send, an in-home housekeeper. I've got 2 years to kind of get these skills addressed. And so really kind of just being very clear and trying to kind of hold back the judgment, but just like a really clear, like kind of tasks that we need to be able to do, and kind of where we are now, where we're going to go, and how do we break that down? So it may be during the like high pressure finals of a sports, season. That's not a great time to like add on laundry, but maybe afterwards or over the summer, over spring break, we say, okay, we're going to have, boot camp, like how to take care of yourself boot camp. And we're going to figure out how to do some of these things so that you can not only learn really the skills, but also kind of the logistics of like, okay, it takes a certain amount of time for laundry to get done, and you can't leave it in the washer, like all this kind of little nuanced detail, kind of nitty gritty stuff that you learn as you do it, so that you'll be prepared when you go off to the next step.
I like that. Just timing is key, probably.
Right.
So their availability, their presence, but then also kind of staying out of judgment of your own child. So I had a teen client recently that was saying, oh, my mom probably told you I was a bad kid. And so she had this label, or she assumed that. And so I think that like moms, it's important to know that we don't want our kids to feel kind of labeled as negative or bad, because, they're busy, they're being successful, they're out and they're engaging in their life. And so just because they're busy and they don't have time for it doesn't mean they're a bad kid. They just haven't had the availability in their schedule to be able to learn those skills. So like you're saying, pick a time when they can do it, summer, maybe something like that. So that's a great solution. And then how do you nurture their identity kind of apart from you? Like this identity piece I love. So how do you do that?
So I think really, even what you were just saying, I think one of the ways to really foster that independence and that kind of motivation for independence is to try to meet the child where they are. So a lot of our conversations, certainly we'd love for ideally the parent to have an eye and like a kind of a goal in mind, but then to be able to talk to the child and say, hey, sounds like you're planning to go to Michigan for college, and we live in Texas, and that's a long way away. What's coming up for you? Like, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind? And often I will say, like more times than not, the kid will say a lot of the things that have a lot of overlap. Like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to do laundry. And it's like, great, let's do that together. Let's figure that out. So you can kind of meet the child where they are, kind of respecting who they are, their own identity, and then being able to kind of use that motivation. Because people are going to be so much more motivated to work on things that they see as a problem or they see as a concern than like what we around them kind of are saying, oh, you really have to be able to do this. So I think that's one thing. What would you guys add, Lucy and Jamie?
I mean, I would say sort of like piggybacking on to that is embracing the kid that you have and remembering their life is not about me. It's really not about me. And so it's very essential to differentiate kind of your life from theirs. And that's so important for your mental health, for their mental health. I love it when parents are so passionate about parenting, but your kid is not your passion, really. They shouldn't be, because that really sets them up for an unhealthy role to like fulfill all your wants, desires, needs, expectations, all of that kind of stuff. And we really want to foster them in being their own own people. And so I think it's important, like, to really look at sort of that intersection between, what your kids are good at, what they value, and what they love to do. Like my daughter Grace, she'll be 16 this summer. And, as much as I would love her to, go and maybe do something in the sciences, she's very different from me in that she's gone way over into the creative field, and she absolutely loves music. She loves 90s grunge, which kind of takes me back. And my husband is absolutely, thrilled about it. But, we're very different individuals. But, I may not relate to her on every single, little thing, but I allow her opportunities to kind of let me know like what she's into, what she's listening to, what she loves, and educate me a bit. And that really like strengthens our connection, our relationship overall.
Well, I love what you said, Jamie, about really kind of acknowledging those differences. And I think kind of not seeing your children as a project or as something that you have to do or that can be your passion. And so there's really this, like, it starts to become a really nice separation when you can tend to the parts of them that are different. Kind of, I think about like acknowledging, their identity apart from yours, and also kind of developing your identity apart from mom. I think that it's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to sit on my hands and not do your laundry because I know that we're working on it. It's quite another to say, I'm not doing your laundry because I'm going to go do this other thing that I'm passionate about. I'm going to go do something for me that's going to be helpful in my own identity. I think that can be really helpful, not only as you're growing independence, but certainly once you're launching. I think so often kids are very aware about what's happening emotionally in their family. And when you are, feeling nervous and then talking to your child or holding your child back because of your own anxiety or your own emotional experience, they get that. And they're very worried about like, what's going to happen with mom? What's mom going to do when I go? But if you are, having a life that you're interested in and doing things that feel good for you and that fill up your own identity, that's so helpful. I mean, not only for yourself, but also for your child. And I think a big part of that is we're all going to have feelings, like Lucy said, come up, right? It's scary to drop your kid off at the mall the first time. It is so frightening to have them travel without you or go somewhere that they can't have their phone with them and you can't be in constant contact. And it's totally normal for you to have feelings that are going to come up, for them to have feelings that are going to come up, and being able to tend to those feelings apart. So for me to be able to say, hey, Lucy, I'm so stressed out. I can't get in touch with my kiddo and I'm so stressed. Like, this is a great conversation for me and Lucy to have. Lucy can help me to tend to my feelings and hold my feelings. But for me to have that with my kid it's not gonna be so helpful.
What about the moms who, this feels like a strong word, but it's just a metaphor where it almost feels like they have this addiction to the identity of being the mom. And it's so much who they are that they can't stop. They're, the room mom, and they're involved in every single thing. And like, they're like frailed and exhausted, and frail's not a word, but like frazzled. Exhausted. Thank you. The F word. The different one. And, they're just running themselves ragged, and then they end up, at some point burning out. And it's this like kind of snowball effect. So it's like, how do you even reach those moms? I mean, they really have to come, to you for some type of assistance, like probably something else is breaking down in their life. But like, what can be done when they don't really know how to truly separate their identity as a mom from a person?
I think those are some of the parents who maybe have the hardest time when their kids leave home, right? And so I think it's hard for all parents when kids leave home on different levels. I think that the parents who have their own things going on in their life maybe are buffered a little bit from some of that just because you have something else to fill the space. But I think that those are the parents that you're describing that maybe when the kid leaves home, like that might be when we would be more likely to see them in our office, because all of a sudden there's this like emptiness, and maybe these feelings they hadn't been able to access or even notice start to bubble up and become really clear at that point.
I think there's either the emptiness, or there's, to your point, what you're saying, Laura, there's an addiction to checking the phone, checking the location, texting, calling, like, what can I do on my end?
Like it continues once they go off to college. They're trying to like continue that.
Right. How can I call the professor? How can I help you to like that there is, and I think all of those moms have in common is that they really want to be a good mom. That
Right.
this started by them really wanting to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the ways that I find to be really helpful is to acknowledge that this comes from a strong desire to be the best mom you can be.
Mm-hmm.
And really just trying to help them to start to embrace the narrative that really good moms, really good parents parent themselves out of a job. The best parents raise kids that are really great adults.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of identifying, kind of like we were talking about before, with the goal for the kid to reach independence, for that to be the goal for moms as well. Of like, I think every mom would agree that they do not want to go with their child to the first day of work. I mean, I think that even the really invested, even though they might say, I kind of do want to go, like that sounds like something, but I think that even that person can say, yeah, that would be across the line. And so if we can, again, kind of, okay, that's the goal. How do we fill in between now and then how do we tend to your identity, tend to your growth as a person separate from the mom role? And acknowledgement. Yeah.
Actually, that's important, remembering that mom is only like one hat that we wear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the hat that we've like permanently glued to our head, how do we almost remember like what are the other facets of self outside of mom?
And how can we get some of those needs, that we're getting from all of the momming, that we're doing? How do we get those needs met in other ways too,
Mm-hmm.
in our life? Like if we really, really enjoy, being the homeroom parent, or we love, heading up the booster club, and we love doing all of these things all of the time for our kids. Well, how can we do some of that outside of the stuff having to do with our kids? Like what's underneath that we can get connected to, so that we can not put all of our eggs kind of in that parent basket. Because as Lucy and Avery were saying, I mean, that it's going to be a hard pill to swallow once they leave. It's yeah.
And not just for the mom. I mean, I
Right.
think that moms that are really tuned in and trying to do the best job often have really tuned in kids that are also trying to do the best job.
Mm-hmm.
And those kids pick up on it. They know that you are dreading them leaving. They know that you don't have anything else in your world as important as them. And that is a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
That's really stressful. That's a lot of pressure. And so I think kind of trying to like access that like desire to be a good mom, and really kind of trying to relate that to like a good mom is one that raises a child that can be confident and independent and feel good about, leaving the nest and going out into the world, and like kind of really trying to define what those goals would be, and kind of how do we break that down and kind of get there, and tend, as Lucy has said, to the emotions that follow, because there will be a lot of feelings that come up.
And then what this made me think of is, what about the intention behind it? So the intention of wanting to be a good mom is very great and very noble. But kind of what I experience sometimes is moms wanting to be a good mom, but maybe for the wrong reason. So the intention is right, but it's like so they can get credit from their husband or from their in-laws or from their friends. That validation, oh, she's such a good mom. She's an amazing mom, right? It's like she needs that. But like, how do you like deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's a really good question. I think part of that is really like what you're saying is kind of really getting to, and it can be all of those things. You can want to be a good mom because it's really important to you to be a good mom, and the validation feels really good, and it feels really good to nurture, and it feels really, I mean, like you can have all of those things can be true. Mm-hmm. And I think being able to, kind of what Jamie was saying, is to find what are those needs, and is there any other way that we can start to address those needs? Is there a need to care for or nurture? Well, there are a lot of ways that we can do that. We can address that need, out in the world and in society. Is it a need for validation? Is it a need for, an atta girl, like good job? Well, we can do that too. And kind of really trying to identify like, what is it that's making it so hard to not pull back? Because you would never like pull back from your child, but to kind of respect and nurture my identity apart from mom, and kind of respect and nurture like my child's identity apart from me. Like, what is it that's making that so tough? And then how do we tend to that? Because I think you're right. It can be a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I think that validation piece, I mean, of course, everybody wants validation, but I think sometimes we can go to greater lengths to get validation to where we end up losing touch with who we are and ourselves. I love gold stars too. I love to hear those at a girl, good job, Jamie. Like, what an awesome parent. Like, what a great job you've done, with your kiddos. Of course, I love that. Also too, I need to learn how to give that to myself as well. And so I think self-validation as a parent is a really important skill to learn to develop over time as well.
And I think also too, kind of trying to keep the aerial view, right? I think so often like you'd have, I know I've experienced this myself as a mom of like, oh my gosh, I feel really anxious about you taking this next step. So right now in this moment, I'm going to make myself feel better by either following you and tracking you on your phone or saying, no, I really don't want you to do that. And like trying to use, honestly, like my child to make me feel better, right? Versus saying, you know what, you're going to go, I'm going to have some feelings. I'm going to need to tend to that separate. And so that you can go and do this, whatever this next step is, that kind of that even that is a separation, right? Versus kind of keeping you in that cycle.
I think it's interesting with all of this though, like it all requires some mindfulness. Does that make sense? So for me to even be aware enough of like, oh, like I'm wanting to follow you on the phone because I feel anxious about your safety and that helps me feel better. Or like, oh, I'm parenting from a place of really wanting gold stars and external validation because that helps me feel better. So I do think sometimes like a great first step is how do we become more aware of like what's operating underneath when many of these things show up very like unconsciously or impulsively or underneath our awareness. And so how do we even to begin with just start to be aware and start to name and put words to some of this?
I love that.
I'm going to pause my conversation with Dr. Avery Honig, Dr. Lucy Smith, and Dr. Jamie Wilson of the Badass Rebellion. If you'd like to hear more, listen to the next episode. Thank you for listening to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast. Because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.